You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast where we introduce you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. Before we jump into this episode, we'd like to give special thanks to Pop, peopleofplay.com, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Without them, this podcast would not be possible.
You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast that introduces you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. I'm artist, engineer, and game inventor David Yakos.
And I'm game designer Branson Faustini, and together we get to talk to the people who make the world of fun.
And we love fun. Today, the fun is brought to you by our guest, Elizabeth Hargrave. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So quick background on Elizabeth, in case the name and the game aren't connected in your brain. She is the inventor and designer of Wingspan. It was her first game to go out, and it was one of those games that has really changed the gaming industry, becoming a new icon across the board. It won the 2019 Kinderspiel des Jahres. For those non-German speakers, it's like the game of the year. That's like the big one. And so congratulations so much on that. That's quite an accomplishment. And then on top of that, you're a nature lover, loves hiking, birding, collecting mushrooms, and you live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. area. So again, thank you so much for being here. So let's jump straight into the meat of this. Mushrooms. You collect mushrooms.
Yeah, so I just spent Labor Day weekend helping run the annual retreat for my local mushroom club here in DC, which has about 900 members. We had 100 people out at a summer camp in Pennsylvania collecting mushrooms. I think we had like 270 species on the table by the end of the weekend.
And how many of those would kill you?
Several of them. And some good edibles too. People were coming back with baskets of black trumpets and chanterelles, which we cooked up and ate. So
that's pretty great. I've collected mushrooms here in Montana, where we'd go out and collect morels, and one day I unfortunately ended up in the ER from a false morel that I'm pretty sure one of my kids or one of the nephews or nieces had put it in the bag, just pieces, and just lesson, never eat the pieces. Just always know the whole mushroom, right?
I'll have to hit you up. My brother's in Helena. I want to know when morel season is so we can.
Oh, yeah. You'll have to come on up.
Yeah, is it like May, April? When is it out there?
Well, it's in the summertime. I don't know exactly. I just know after the morels come out after a forest fire. So we go out, we find them, and it's
Yeah.
Here
they're just a spring thing. We don't get the fire morels.
Oh yeah. Moving beyond mushrooms.
Yeah, we like to go kind of back to the very beginning and how you kind of got into games in the first place. Was it like a childhood thing? Were you always playing games, or did it kind of happen later in life?
Yeah, my family always played some games. I remember playing a lot of Hearts and Scrabble growing up. And then in college, I lived in a big group house where we played spades almost every day and also a lot of Scrabble. But I didn't really stumble on like the modern board games industry until maybe like 2005. I was at a weekend retreat with folks from my Unitarian church, and someone had brought Catan and Carcassonne. I forget what else. Ticket to Ride, I think we played that weekend. I was totally hooked.
Straight into like the big three of like German board games.
Right?
Getting into game inventing yourself, was that something that, like, how did you decide, hey, I'm going to invent a game myself?
So I was playing a lot of games, and at some point I had a conversation with a bunch of friends where we were like, so we love all these games, but none of them are actually about anything that's even remotely interesting to us. Like, Ticket to Ride is fun, but I don't really care about train routes across the United States inherently. And so it was my spouse who was like, what if there was like Race for the Galaxy, which we played a lot at the time, but for birds, like something that was that engaging in the gameplay, but about something we actually care about. And my brain kind of wouldn't let that go.
So you started with a theme versus the mechanic? You started with birds first and then started to work on the game engine around that? Or did you have...
I would say for all of my games, it's always been both. Like, yes, theme, but I have to have an idea of where to go with that theme and like what the core mechanic would be. And so Wingspan was always sort of card-based, engine building, tableau building kind of game. Mariposas had to be movement on a map, right? Like it's not just theme first, but like both of them together all along.
So how long did it take to develop Wingspan, like from the initial idea to and here it is.
I started working on Wingspan, I think late 2013. I pitched it at Gen Con in 2016. And then Jamie Stegmaier at Stonemaier Games and I sort of worked on it together for another year after that. So for most of 2017. And then all of 2018 was just kind of getting in the art and getting it actually printed before it was released at the beginning of 2019. So it was a long process.
Yeah, so the prototyping and the play testing, maybe we can jump into that a little bit, because that's, on a game like this that has got a serious game engine, if you will. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about your prototyping, your play testing process? Because it's got to be, it doesn't just hit the very first time. Like you've got an idea in your head and you start to play and you're like, okay, this is broken. We got to fix this.
I mean, my very first prototype for most games is just handwritten pencil on paper. That was definitely true for Wingspan. And I kind of try and play it with myself a little bit to figure out if there's something there and like get it to the point that I'm willing to inflict it on other people. With Wingspan, then the next level from there was like my family and friends playing it. Now my process is much more, I have a group of other game designers that I play test with regularly, which I think gets you a lot farther, a lot faster, generally. But I was not connected to the design community here in DC at all when I was first starting out. So that took a while to sort of find other people.
And it turns out there's a good community of game inventors that a lot of them are just for each other as well.
Right here in DC, we've got Matthew O'Malley, who lives about a mile from me, Dominic Krapushets, who's over in Bethesda. Stonemaier just announced their next game is by Connie Vogelman, who's down on Capitol Hill. Yeah, we've got a whole, and lots of other folks who are not published yet, but a good crew of folks here really thinking hard about games. It's fun.
And actually, just coming next week here, I believe Hasbro's got a Women Inventors in Play conference is coming up that's available to people over 18. And I believe you're speaking at it coming up here on the September 12th, correct?
Yeah, I'm excited for it. It sounds like they have a lot of people signed up.
Yeah, it should be an awesome event. Tanya Thompson from Hasbro has been putting that together. And we'll make sure to put the links in the information below for those that are interested, but definitely get signed up and take part in that. It's an awesome community for inventors, definitely for each other and the encouragement, finding the different play testers that can work with you and even help connect you with other companies. The prototype that you brought to Stonemaier, what did that look like? Was it pencil sketches? Was it like how detailed was that when you first brought that sample to them?
No, that was a very detailed prototype, and I actually got cards printed by Drive-Thru Cards, which was probably overkill. But I didn't have as good a process as I do now for sort of printing and sleeving stuff. So Yeah, it was a pretty polished prototype. The eggs were just poker chips, so and there were whole pieces of the game that didn't exist yet. It didn't have a player mat, or the goals, or a bunch of things. But or maybe it did have goals, but they worked differently. Anyway, yeah, it was a much more polished prototype by that point. I found also like sort of midway through the process that when I went to Unpub in Baltimore for the first time, I was very nervous, and so having like a good looking prototype made me feel better walking into that room. And I do think like the level that I polished, like the look of it was probably overkill and time that I wish I had back. But at the same time, it probably also brought more playtesters to my table to have a good looking prototype. I have friends now who talk about like it's good to have a match between the look of your prototype and where you think you are in the process, so that you don't give playtesters the wrong impression about what level of feedback you're looking for. So that pencil on paper prototype is perfect for if you're like spitballing and trying to figure out if there's even a game there. And then as it gets more and more polished, you can polish the physical look of it also. And then, when you're almost done and you've got art on the cards and everything, then people are sort of clued into like, I think this is a pretty close to finished product, and give me feedback accordingly.
And then you can begin to inflict it on more and more people, the more polished it gets.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And in that last stage, you need more people out of the design community and more like regular players who are just like, does this even make sense to you? Because it's easy to forget that when you're playtesting with other designers, they can fill in a lot of the gaps in the rules, right?
Oh, for sure.
Not really even thinking about it. So
especially when you start to connect with a brand that then takes your idea, your game, and it morphs inevitably a little bit with the brands that you're connecting with, that some extra pieces or a little bit more story gets tweaked inevitably. And so it's nice when you find a good partner who can see your vision but help take it through the rest of the way. One of the things that really sets that game apart too, I was at a music festival here in Bozeman, Montana, Sweet Pea Festival, and I was going through the booths, and there's these artists, beautiful paintings, all over the place, and somebody had a bunch of geek art. They had Doctor Who paintings, and I saw some of their paintings had like battleship pieces and some Monopoly, and then I saw one of the paintings had a Wingspan card. I was like, oh my gosh, it's there's a painting of the painting from the game, which is quite cool. But I've heard a lot of people just talk about how much they love the art on Wingspan. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit as to where that's come from, and maybe some of the response that you've heard and how that's helped push the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I definitely can't take any credit for, but I can tell you a little bit of the story behind it, which is that Natalia Rojas, one of the artists for All the Birds, used to live in St. Louis, where Stonemaier is based. And so she knew Alan Stone, the Stone in Stonemaier, because their kids went to school together. The story I heard is that they were literally talking on the playground, and she mentioned that she was an artist and he wanted to know what kind, and it went from there. And then it was so many pieces that they needed in a relatively short period of time. And she had a friend that she had gone to high school with in Colombia. She's originally from Colombia. So Anna has more formal training as a scientific illustrator than Natalia does. And so she was perfect to rope in to do, so they split the illustrations between them. And yeah, the rest is history. It's beautiful. And they've worked on every expansion. They just keep working on the birds. It's great.
The expansions, I suppose there's got to be some limit, but it's almost limitless. I was living down in Costa Rica, and I remember there's the Costa Rican bird book had like 903 birds or something in just one country. And people would come down from all over the world just to try to see as many birds as they can. So that's
where I got hooked.
Was it really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any
I mean, I've always been into nature in general, and like had binoculars, would be curious a little bit about birds, but wasn't like specifically going to look at birds. But it was in Costa Rica that I feel like we went looking for the Costa Rican bird book and bought one while we were there because we were just like, this is crazy.
What about bird favorites? So I'm assuming out of all of these, I'm partial to the western meadowlark that lives in the grasslands, Montana state bird.
Strong choice.
You've got the card, the great horned owls because they live in my yard. But what about you? Like, what are your go-to favorites?
I always say the roseate spoonbill. I grew up in Florida, or went to high school in Florida, and they don't go a lot further north than that. But they're crazy big water birds with a ridiculous beak. It's straight, and then it's got a spoon on the end of it. Spoonbill, and they're pink. Did I say they're pink?
No. It's like a messed up flamingo.
Yeah, often people will see them flying overhead and report that they've seen a flamingo, but flamingos really are hard to see in Florida. They're mostly further south, maybe off the Keys if you're very lucky. But there's a decent number of roseate spoonbills, so chances are if you see a big pink bird, it's that.
Nice.
I like ravens.
Yeah.
Nice.
People, I don't know, they have this dramatic, kind of mythological element to them. Ravens, they're dark and mysterious, but I don't know. I just think they're kind of goofy. They're humongous, and they kind of waddle around, and they just, I don't know. You see them every once in a while.
And they're really smart. That whole family, crows and ravens, are just like, they learn to recognize people. If you do something to piss them off, they will terrorize you for years.
Yeah.
Enemy for life. So you emphasize observing like player reactions or in play tests and stuff. What do you have any memorable play tests when you'd sit down to play, like things that stand out, where you've had like responses like, oh, they hate it, they love it. Like, what are some memorable play tests that you experienced?
So the one I remember, because we tell this story a lot, is that there's a local group here called Break My Game that meets once a month in used to be in a local game cafe, now it's in a store. But the person who organizes that, I will never forget, and they tell this story all the time. We played my game, and at the end, Danny was like, this was great, but you're going to have to change the theme. No publisher is going to take a game about birds. I was like, yeah, but the birds are kind of the point.
Prove them wrong. Well, it was a nice gap in the market. Like there was, you had a good window there. And if people are traveling around the world, or trying to do the big year, like where they get to see as many birds as they can.
Right. I mean, I think it's a subject that a lot of people have a connection to, even if they don't pursue it as a hobby. Like, everyone enjoys seeing the birds out in their yard, or, just at some basic level, like you've got some connection to the fact that these are pretty delightful animals. So, yeah, I wasn't really thinking of it like strategic marketing wise as like, oh, this is a hole in the market, but I think I just personally felt like it was a hole in the market that I wanted this game to exist, right?
Yeah, I don't know how many inventions come to pass because it's like, I just want this. I want it for myself. Where is it?
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in how somebody goes about building an expansion for a game.
For the first Wingspan expansion, I started working on it before Wingspan even was released. Jamie was pretty sure that we would want to do multiple expansions. And so I was still working on it when I started seeing reviews come out for Wingspan. And so one of the things that I tried to do in that expansion was to think about some of the criticisms that people had in their reviews, and like, are there ways that I could ameliorate those with some expansion content? And so that that first expansion is pretty much sort of a more of the same expansion, more cards, more end of round goals, but with powers on them that are trying to give people things where they can score points in one turn that are not laying eggs. Because people feel like at the end of the game, if they sort of don't count out their turns well, they get stuck just taking several turns where the only significant points they can score is laying eggs. And more varied end of round goals. We came up with more ideas for those. So it was sort of a more of the same. And then with Oceania, that was the next one, I tried to do something that shook it up a little bit more. And so there's a whole new player mat that changes the distribution of how much stuff you get in each row of the game. Like how many eggs you get versus how much food you get is a different distribution. It adds a wild food type. It adds a whole new set of bird powers that are like game end scoring conditions. So that was sort of, we're going to change things more. There's and then Asia, Jamie had the idea that he wanted to do an expansion that people could buy and play as a standalone 2-player game if they wanted to. Maybe they hadn't gotten the base game yet, and this would be a little bit lower price point for people that are playing 2-player. And I also had noticed that when I play 2-player a lot, you end up with the end of round goals where both people win 2 of them and the scores kind of cancel out. So I was trying to think about something more interesting to do around the end of round goals. And then because we were doing the freestanding 2-player, and so it has to have the player mats and all the stuff for 2 players, and we had been seeing on the Facebook page that people will like take 2 copies of the base game of Wingspan and stick them together and do these massive like 7 or 8 player games, and it takes like 4 or 5 hours, and they're like pleased as punch to do it, and I'm just looking at it going, oh my god, I can't believe you're playing for 5 hours. So we did this thing where we made a 7-player, up to 7 players version, but where I worked out how 2 people could take turns simultaneously at high player counts. Just a fun thing to throw in of like, okay, if I'm making you buy this extra stuff that you don't need if you really have the base game, like here's a reason that you might someday want these 2 extra player mats. So trying to think creatively like that, and then along the way, and all of them having to, come up with new birds and new powers. So I just have this giant spreadsheet where I keep track of ideas that people send me or ideas that I have about more things that birds could have. And for each one, I sort of sit down with it and go through and be like, okay, this is a set that might work here, and how can I riff on these and sort of come up with a coherent set of birds.
Behind every great game is a spreadsheet.
Definitely.
I am convinced, they're all of the gaming mechanics. There's some Excel spreadsheet or Google spreadsheet that's got, the math worked out, the powers, the names. It's
right. And so that actually is a piece of the expansions that becomes very easy because I worked out all of the math for what a bird is worth in the base game, and I don't ever have to do it again because I want it on. So that is a significant.
So being a game inventor has to come with the thick skin. I know we pitch a lot of games. We've placed a good number, but in between that, there's a lot of rejections. And even when you're doing the play testing, like the feedback, unless it's your mom who's like, I love it. It's like, you've got to get, those friends who are just like, yeah, why don't you go ahead and start over? Or like, can you tell us a little bit more about using some of the feedback that you hear from people, or like, how do you use like the rejection as like a research tool?
I mean, I think the first thing you have to really internalize is that I love it is useless to you until the end. Like, I love it does not move your game forward at all. So if you know in your gut that there's still work to be done and someone says, I love it, that is a useless playtest. Yeah. You need people to tell you what's wrong with it and to tell you their honest experience so that you can make it better. And, it took me a little while to get there, but I really I can hear anything at this point. I might not take all of it. I think I think there's a fine balance between having enough self-confidence to be able to hear criticism and take it in, and to be humble enough to take it in, right? And to really listen to the criticisms, but at the same time to like know what your vision is for the game, to not let people make a bunch of recommendations that are taking your game somewhere that's not consistent with that vision, right? So you have to really like take it all in and be willing to listen, but then also to filter. And that's just, I think, a learned skill. And you can end up spinning your wheels quite a bit if you change things too much, just blowing with the wind, whichever way the most recent playtest was. But I try now when I start a game to sort of sit down and actually write out a few core things of like, who is this game for? What's the story I'm trying to tell? What do I want to feel like? How thinky or breezy? Those sorts of things. And then when I get feedback, or and a lot of those things are also things that I can tell playtesters at the beginning of a playtest. Undergrove is a game about the fact that trees trade with mushrooms. It will always be about that. You're not going to change my mind about the subject matter. It's, I'm aiming it to be roughly wingspan weight or even comfortable, a little heavier, right? And then it's, for wingspan fans and fans of mushrooms who can handle that weight level. And going into a playtest with that information, playtesters then know where they're aiming at, right? They know whether their experience feels consistent with what I told them I was looking for. Which is very different if I came in for that same game and said, this is a game I want parents to be able to play with their kids, because I want kids to get excited about mushrooms. Hopefully playtesters would be like, no, you need to dumb this way down, right? Like if you give your playtesters what you're looking for ahead of time, you can get much better feedback out of them.
It's interesting with educational games, you've got to kind of sneak that education into the fun. If you've got, if it's too, I remember the accountant that came to me and said, I've got a game idea. I want people to learn how to do their taxes in a game. Like, well, that's not going to work. So you got to kind of start with the fun but you can kind of sneak in that educational aspect. If it becomes too much memorization or too much like a school classroom, the kids aren't going to want to replay it over and over again. And you've done a good job of bringing in an educational, world expanding, topic matter into your game. So that's, way to go on that.
Thank you. It was, you mentioned memorization. It was very important to me that memorization not play any role, right? Because that's all the bird games that existed before Wingspan were like trivia games. And then if you play it like a birder and a non-birder, like it's not even a contest, right? Yeah, and it's not fun when you're forcing people to, and I think it makes people feel stupid, right? You want your game to give people moments of feeling really smart about how they're playing. And memorization generally and like having to regurgitate information does not lead to that feeling.
Nope.
How do you decide to move on from an idea that maybe isn't working as well as you hoped or isn't right for the rest of the experience you're trying to create?
Interesting. I don't have that many games that I've shelved. I tend to be pretty stubborn. But the ones that I have shelved, I think it's just like I'm not feeling it. Like I have to want to work on it. And if it doesn't feel like it's going somewhere, it's not like a super conscious decision. It's just like I'm not going to spend my time on that. I have this other thing that I'm excited about. And some of them I'll pull back at. Like Mariposas actually is an example. And Undergrove, actually. I had started a mushroom game too a while back that didn't really go anywhere, and I had shelved it for a while. And then when Mark, my co-designer, and I were talking about starting a game together from scratch. I was like, I was trying to make this mushroom thing work. And then we just started from scratch all over. But the idea had been there before. Mariposas was a game that I had started and had shelved because it just wasn't quite working. And then when I came back to it, and it had been like in the back of my brain for a year, and I picked it back up, it was like, oh, here's the way forward. And it just works now, So I do think it can be useful to shelve a game, but it's not a super conscious, like I don't have criteria or anything. It's just like, this isn't working. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to bang my head against the wall. The fun part for me is the puzzle solving of moving a game forward. And if I'm not moving it forward, I feel it for sure.
So you mentioned Undergrove. Maybe we could jump into that game a little bit. Where is that right now? Give us a snapshot.
That game is about to go to Kickstarter. November 7th is the date they're aiming for. So it's got all the art. We're making last minute revisions to the rule book, but it's pretty much done.
So outside of mushrooms, we got the mushroom plug, but what is the game in? Can you give us a little bit of an umbrella description of why are we all going to spend more money on Kickstarter this November?
So it's a game about the fact that trees trade resources with mushrooms underground, which not everyone knows, but and so you're playing from the point of view of a tree, trying to get your seedlings established out in the world, and you, the tree, are able to make carbon whenever you want because you can photosynthesize with your leaves. Mushrooms, there's a set of mushrooms that do not have, no mushrooms can make their carbon. Nothing on Earth can make carbon but plants, right? It all comes from the plants. And there's a set of mushrooms that decompose trees that are not in the game. And there's a set of mushrooms that get carbon by creating a symbiotic relationship with trees. They are better at getting nutrients out of the soil than the trees are. And the trees are willing to give them carbon and get other nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in exchange, which is mind-blowing and sort of fundamental to all of life on Earth. And a lot of people don't know that it even happens.
Holy science. So we're playing as the point of view of the tree in this game. So we're the point of view of the tree. We're the trees.
The point of view of the tree, and there's a shared play space on the table that is all the mushrooms that you can interact with. So you have to put your seedlings out into that set of mushrooms, and they get little roots that let you interact with the different mushrooms. And each mushroom tile has a different thing that it will do for you when you pay it some carbon or other things. And you're building that shared set of mushrooms on the table over the course of the game. So the board actually grows as you're going. And then you're placing pieces in strategic places so that you have access to the mushroom powers that you want. And then you've been paying carbon out of the board. You can also suck the carbon up into your seedlings to help them grow up into little trees. So there's cute little tree standees.
And how do you win?
And so the mushrooms have points on them, and you want to have trees and seedlings that have grown up enough to score their roots that are on the mushrooms. So you get the most points.
We'll definitely share the link of this in the descriptions below. So if you love trees, you love mushrooms. If you love nature, if you love science, and if you love games, any of the above, it sounds like a good one.
If you love art by Beth Sobel, she did all the mushroom art.
Oh, cool. Sounds like it's going to be a beautiful game, and it's going to be a stout one. You said is maybe as heavy as Wingspan, if not heavier. Somewhere in there. Yeah,
it's interesting. When we asked playtesters, for a while we were asking every playtest, how do you think this compares to Wingspan sort of difficulty-wise? And some people would say harder and some people would say easier. And it was very interesting dynamic in that way. I think part of it is that it has a real spatial aspect to it that Wingspan doesn't. And some people are more comfortable with one or the other. So that might be part of it. I don't know. I thought it was very interesting.
It sounds like it. Is it your first Kickstarter?
No, so we did one for Tussie Mussie with Button Shy, and then last year we did one for the Fox Experiment, which is with Pandasaurus. So, and that one went great. So that should be delivering any day now to backers from that Kickstarter and out in retail sometime this fall. So I seem to be on sort of a cycle of fall Kickstarter, deliver the next year.
It's nice that you deliver them.
Well, that's not up to me. It's sort of out of my hands at that point. But yeah, I am happy to get my game.
Do you have any advice for new game designers, kind of just getting their start?
I always tell people my biggest advice is to get it out of your head and onto the table. Like spending a lot of time thinking about your game, in my experience, can be counterproductive because I find that often I spent all this time thinking through something and then I make it and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about this one thing that makes all of those other things that I planned out on top of that. Like it all falls apart, right? So like, for me, I have to see it played out. And often I'll play it against myself. And so that's the other thing, I guess, is like you don't even have to necessarily wait for other people to be available for you. Just like make a thing and play it and play 2 people worth of it if you can, if it's not like some sort of hidden information thing. Even then, you can pretend you don't know the information that the other person has just to see if it works, right? So that's my biggest thing is like fail faster, get it on the table. What else? I think everything else stems from that of just like playtest and iterate and playtest and iterate, and you gotta put in the work. And I think you get smarter as you do that. And I don't think there's any like magic set of rules about how games work. I guess I have a few little rules of thumb, like people like free stuff, people like to feel smart, things like that. And then as you gather those little tidbits of wisdom, like everyone has their own personal set of those, and that becomes your style as a designer, kind of.
Yeah, that kind of fail fast or get it on the table is great advice, because I think one of the things, there's that intimidation factor of like, I don't even have all my cards or my art. But really those first play tests can be sticky notes and Play-Doh. Like it doesn't take much to at least even start to physically work through a play test.
Yeah, and if you have the vision for a game with a lot of cards, here's a major piece of advice. Like for most of its life of playtesting, Wingspan was 50 cards.
Now you've got 170 birds, right?
Less work. Like you can work out all the mechanics without having to keep tinkering with each individual card in a 100-card deck. Like you can do whatever it is you're trying to do with 50 cards and then make the deck bigger. You could probably do a lot of things with 30 cards and then make the deck bigger, right? And just like get the structure going before you spend too much time fleshing it out.
Yeah, that's helpful. You know, one of the tools we'll often do is we'll take a whiteboard and set it down on the table, and the whiteboard is our game board. And so we're actually drawing like our game mats or the game board or like the rules. It's on the table, and that one doesn't work. Erase that, and so it's
for player mats, I'll do sheets of acetate, like the old overhead projector. Plasticky things, or the plastic pockets that you put stuff in a 3-ring binder. What are those called? Sheet projectors?
Yeah.
Right on those with dry erase, like anything. Yeah, dry erase is awesome. Anything that just like gets you out of this feeling of like, oh, I made this beautiful printed thing and I don't want to write on it. Like write on everything, scribble on everything, cross things out and change them mid playtest, and just like keep it moving, keep it flexible. And that's easier to do with other game designers than with friends and family, for sure.
I think I stress Branson out sometimes. He'll hand me like some really beautiful prototype pieces, and I immediately like grab my Sharpie and start writing on some of them. Like, well, this is just a prototype, so
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going to a playtest once with people that had like commissioned artwork, and I made a suggestion about a game. There was like something having to do with a lost child, and it was possible to like have the child die. And I was like, this is not going to fly on a lot of people's tables, right? This art. And I was like, you shouldn't have gotten the art yet. This is like a fundamental thing that's going to be really disturbing to some people. Right? You can be incentivized to let the child die in this game is not a good thing. And, it was very like, if you get too far with your art or with making it too pretty or not wanting to write on it, like that makes you sometimes not willing to change the gameplay in a way that it might need to change. So just keep things loose. Be willing to change it.
That's good advice. You mentioned Undergrove. Any other sneak peek of what else is on the horizon?
Yeah, I think I'm going to turn to doing Wingspan stuff. I have promised that I'm going to do an expansion for each continent. So I've done the base game, Europe, Oceania, Asia. I have a couple left.
We'll keep an eye open for those, and then I can do my 8-hour play games. No, looking forward to those.
Yeah. Well, to close things up, we like to ask a series of rapid fire questions based on the roll of our hidden roll die.
Our question randomizer.
Yes.
I got a few questions written out based on what we roll.
Now, because you can't reach to the screen here, I'll be rolling for you. But
I could probably grab a D6 somewhere on my desk. Okay, let's do it.
All right, let's do the first roll here.
Ooh, the star. Outside of Wingspan, naturally. What, like when you get together with friends right now, what are like 3 games that are just sort of like your go-to games right now that are like low pressure, not even your favorite, just like quick grabs? I know everybody's going to want to play this. Let's have some fun tonight.
The first thing that comes to mind is Dominion. I have a group of friends that still loves Dominion.
Nice.
It will always hit the table. We've started teaching the tweens Dominion.
Nice.
And they can, they've got it at this point. So that's exciting because they want to play. And anything that will get the kids to still sit down with the adults and play games is a big win. So in that vein, junk art will often make it to our table. Because it's a dexterity game. So that's a great equalizer between the kids and the adults and not too thinky. What else? On the thinkier end of the spectrum, I really enjoy Castell. Do you guys know that one?
I don't.
I've seen it on Board Game Geek, but...
The human pyramids that people build in Catalonia. And so you're like traveling around in Catalonia with your little troop of human pyramid people in competitions. And it's like, it's pretty brain burny how to make your little tiles of people all stack in the most advantageous way. And I really enjoy it.
I love it when I get asked that question and I get to discover a new one for myself.
Totally.
Thank you. All right, another roll. The $sign. So if money was no object, like what kind of gaming or play experience would you make? I'm talking like you had ridiculous amounts, like, you know, enough to buy countries, like kind of money. Like,
I want like a board game retreat center on an island. No, not on an island. I want to be able to go for pretty long hikes, so it would have to be a big island.
like a continent.
So I'm a massive introvert, so board game conventions are actually like way too big for me. I do not enjoy them. But if I could go hang out with like 50 people at a time and play board games and hang out in nature, that would be pretty awesome.
That would be fun.
That's fun.
I've seen some like Airbnbs that have got like board game themed rooms and.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would come to that retreat center.
Me too.
You need 47 more people. All right, one more roll. The sword. All right. Competitive nature. So Are there games that you just like need to win, like where your competitive nature comes out and you just get nasty, get mean, like you're going to die?
Is there anything?
Or are you just too nice?
Not so much that I'm too nice, but I enjoy the process a lot. My spouse is the kind of person who really cares about winning, and I I'm happy that we played a game more than I care about who won. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I like get. I definitely will be like, if I lose, I'll be like, okay, best 2 out of 3 on shorter games. I care
3 out of 5.
I don't really like
4 out of 7.
Okay. Yeah, right. So like Lost Cities or Race for the Galaxy, something sort of that length, we often will play multiple games in a row, and it'll even out over time. We're pretty evenly matched. So yeah.
That's fun. Well, this has been great getting to jump in. Again, congrats on all of your success. Way to make awesome games. For starts, there's a lot of games out there, and just to make something that's unique, that has shifted the genre. Congrats on that. That's a big one. And for listeners, viewers, is there a place where people should follow?
Yeah, so I have a website that has a bunch of links to like social media, and I have a little newsletter that you can sign up for that I'm very bad about sending out, but like we'll definitely send one when the Kickstarter is going live, that kind of thing. And so my website is the first 4 letters of my name and then my last name, so elizhargrave.com.
That's awesome.
Thanks for being on the show. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you
for
so
having me.
much. And until next time, let's go
All right.
play some games.
This has been Hidden Roll, the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. If you like what we're doing, the best way you can support us is to share us with your favorite brains. Please thumbs up, leave a review, and follow Hidden Roll Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. You can also sign up for our newsletter at www.hiddenrollpodcast.com for a monthly sneak peek at our upcoming content. That's Hidden Roll, ROLE, podcast.com. Our episodes are available on all major listening platforms, or if you'd like to see our beautiful faces, all of our content is available to watch on YouTube. If you know of someone who would be a great fit to appear in our podcast, or if you'd like to learn the story behind any toy or game, send us an inquiry at hiddenrollpodcast.com/suggestions. Or let us know on our social media. We love to hear your feedback and ideas. Once again, special thanks to Pop, People of Play, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Visit www.peopleofplay.com to learn more. This podcast is also made possible by the continued support of the brains who never grew up, inventors of play, Streamline Design. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.